Okay, good morning everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to present in this session. My name is McAteer, and I'm a research fellow from Queen's University in Belfast. In this presentation, I will talk about an upcoming book chapter co-authored by Dr. Wesley Flannery and I that will be published later this year. The book explores the topic of knowledge co-production, and our chapter specifically examines the participatory research approach of citizen science. As I will discuss in greater detail throughout the presentation, our chapter assesses the professionalisation of citizen science and questions how this shift is limiting the potential of researcher activist participation. In regard to the structure of this presentation, I'll begin with a brief discussion on the general theme of community action for sustainability and why I find it of interest. I will then move to the topic of citizen science, which is the focus of our recent research. I will explain what makes it unique from other forms of co-production and provide some examples of citizen science projects that we have looked into. Following this, I will outline the conceptual framework of this chapter and present the key findings of our research. Principally, these findings involve a discussion of the apparent shift towards professionalisation within citizen science. I will document the evidence of this shift before analysing both the opportunities and limitations of a professionalised model of citizen science, and I will question how this is impacting both volunteer participation and knowledge production. To conclude, I will highlight both the learning lessons that we can take from our findings, as well as suggesting a number of solutions that can be taken going forward. As many of you will be aware, there have been growing examples of civic action for sustainability in recent years. These include strikes and activist campaigns for climate action, which have taken place across the globe and have a high level of engagement with younger generations. What interests me the most is to understand how we can mobilise these recent surges in environmental activism. What are the most powerful or effective means of enabling those with an interest in sustainability to enhance their participation? This led us to explore the topic of participatory research and, in particular, citizen science. Citizen science is an approach to co-production that involves members of the public practicing science outside of an academic or industrial environment. Whilst the majority of citizen science projects are organised by non-governmental organisations and charities, many of these are financially supported by government bodies or departments. The general aim of citizen science is threefold. Firstly, to extend research capacity. Put simply, the involvement of large numbers of individuals capable of researching vast geographic and temporal scales means that citizen science can significantly enhance the scope of research endeavours. Secondly, to assist with the democratisation of knowledge production. By offering non-scientists the opportunity to participate in research, including marginalised communities or individuals who have been traditionally excluded from such circles, citizen science carries the potential of empowering a wide range of knowledge sources. Thirdly, to raise the awareness of important social and environmental issues that have been ignored or underexplored by professional research. It is, by its nature, a cost-effective means of co-producing knowledge. When operating under the right circumstances, citizen science has the potential to inform policy, broaden the engagement of communities with governance processes, and instill learning and social outcomes amongst participants. It is for these reasons that literature has begun to consider the potential of citizen science to transform conservation management into more transparent, socially relevant, and democratic processes. During our research, we examined a range of citizen science projects in the UK and Ireland. Mainly, we looked into marine citizen science projects, in other words, projects that took place in coastal or offshore regions. One of these projects was a ferry survey, supported by the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group. This project used volunteers to conduct line transit surveys for citations on board commercial car ferries across the Irish Sea. A second example is Northern Ireland's Beach Litter Survey, organised by a charity called Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful. This project asked volunteers to not only collect litter on beaches and shorelines, but to record the types and location of litter that they find. This information has been used to inform management plans on how to most efficiently and effectively tackle litter problems. A similar initiative is the RSPB's Beach Bird Survey, which monitors the frequency and location of beach birds along the UK coast. An example of a more technical project is the diving programmes organised by Sea Search. Operating across the UK and Ireland, these projects recruit amateur divers to monitor the condition of underwater habitats and ecosystems, providing vital ecological findings. provide an example of how citizen science can instigate transformative change, it is useful to reference a sea search diving project that mapped the bed of seagrass along the eastern coast of Northern Ireland. The volunteers shared their findings of one of the largest yet previously unmapped seagrass beds with the government department responsible for environmental management. The volunteers suggested that the area should be designated as a marine conservation zone so that no marine activities could damage the bed or the important ecological conditions that it supported. The volunteers' data was checked by the department's professional diving team, and, in time, a conservation zone was designated. This is an important example of how citizen science can empower local knowledge to instigate change to conservation governance. Although we find this example of interest, we realise that there is relatively little about transformation in the citizen science literature. Whilst there are suggestions of how citizen science can act in a transformative manner, there is an underappreciation of how transformational change must involve actions that challenge prevailing power relations. Thus, we argue that research must reframe what transformation is and assess why projects often fail to instigate change. We suggest that citizen science must develop a more explicit comprehension of what power is and how it relates to the use and production of knowledge. These assertions are informed by the work of French philosopher Michel Foucault, who illustrates how any analysis of social relations that does not consider the workings of power can only be interpreted as an abstraction. The teachings of Foucault suggest that power must not only be considered or framed as a negative force, one which can coerce or suppress individuals, but also as a productive force. He uses the examples of the production of knowledge, discourses, and languages to highlight how power can also create new ways of shaping social relations. In this sense, power can create new realities and should not be considered as a zero-sum game. At the cornerstone of Foucault's work is a recognition that power is co-constitutive of knowledge. In other words, knowledge is more than simply an instrument of power. There can be no power that is not supported by a body of knowledge, and likewise, no dominant form of knowledge that is not aligned to a relation of power. It is this close relationship between power and knowledge that renders Foucault's work especially relevant to the examinations of citizen science. As such, we lean upon these lessons while examining the organisation and operationalisation of citizen science projects. We adopted this conceptual framework to examine the organisational dynamics of citizen science projects that are financially supported by government bodies. Following 29 interviews with citizen science practitioners and government staff, as well as 308 surveys with volunteers, we find that there are unequal balances of power between participating actors. This is something that has been considered in the wider co-production research literature, but not in the field of citizen science. Importantly, we reveal the shifting positionality of government in regard to the organisation and development of projects. Government actors are transitioning from being end users of citizen science data to being co-producers of initiatives. We identified a number of examples of this growing influence of government in relation to how projects are designed and how they evolve. First, the setting of objectives, meaning that government can push practitioners to create projects that answer specific policy problems or align with predetermined research questions. Second, the implementation of standards and standardized practices. These are designed to improve the quality of citizen science data, but are also seen to dictate the scope of what volunteers can do within projects. Such standards can also ensure that only specific types of knowledges are produced by initiatives, with interviewees discussing how the collection of qualitative information, which can be a key form of local knowledge, is rarely facilitated. Thirdly, the setting of short-term timeframes, usually 1 to 3 years of funding. This is revealed as being a major barrier to recruiting and training a strong cohort of volunteers. Whilst it may provide enough time to answer research questions, it ignores the importance of considering the social component of projects, or how many environmental issues require long-term monitoring approaches if they are to be effectively addressed. All of these examples suggest a shift from amateurism to professionalism within citizen science. Practitioners spoke of how there is little that they can do to challenge these issues from being taken out of their hands without risking future funding relations being put in trouble. These aspects are reflected in the responses of interviewees, demonstrating a contrast in the perceptions of government actors and practitioners. One government manager discussed how they try to pinpoint projects that may align with their needs and may represent the best opportunity to answer pressing policy gaps. On the other hand, practitioners illustrate an important trade-off that they must navigate. Whilst funding for government can act as a bridging function, enabling projects to develop a pathway for their data to inform policy, it can also represent a policing function. In other words, government involvement can allow policymakers to dismiss citizen science knowledge that does not align with their specific requirements. For some practitioners, this ignores the intricacies of what local knowledge can represent. The increasingly professionalized model of citizen science, where participation can be overly concerned with filling gaps of data, is seen to have a damaging impact upon volunteer participation. Our findings suggest that professionalization in citizen science is narrowing the pathways to participation available for volunteers and is also limiting the scope of what projects can achieve. Our survey findings reveal that only one half of volunteers feel that their initial motivations for participation are realized, be they improving their scientific and educational skills, engaging with like-minded others, or using their knowledge and insight to challenge policy. The results of survey also reveal how there are different types of volunteers who take part in projects. From hobbyists, those who see citizen science as a means of extending their hobbies, professionals, either retired individuals who have worked in the environmental sector in the past, or those who view their participation as a stepping stone to working in the environmental sector, conservationists who seek to advance their interests in environmental conservation, or activists who attempt to actively improve the quality of their environment by challenging environmental injustice and inequality through their participation. By critically assessing these differences and exploring the perceptions of volunteers, we are led to believe that professionalization in citizen science is encouraging volunteers to self-police their activism, thus making projects more attractive to careerists or professional volunteers. This exclusion of activists in some citizen science projects is a worry, as it suggests that not only are pathways to participation narrowing, but that volunteers, as well as practitioners, are beginning to be forced to self-govern themselves. These examples of nuanced power relations is something that we seek to explore further in future research. A final finding of note from the survey is that there is little to no feedback loops in projects, meaning that the views and concerns of volunteers are not always heard or factored into future initiatives. This can significantly hinder the capacity of volunteers to maximize their potential contribution. Some volunteers speak of how they felt empowered by taking part in citizen science projects, yet did not feel that their knowledge was truly empowered or had the desired impact. Others highlight the need for much greater feedback mechanisms that can accommodate their thoughts and concerns regarding participation. This could significantly help to retain a strong volunteer group and would encourage volunteers to maximize their contribution when participating. In revealing the increasing professionalization of citizen science, we are inclined to argue that the overwhelming involvement of government in some projects is harming the uniqueness that citizen science holds, namely its active and open participation. Knowledge co-production should not simply be about contributing knowledge that can add to datasets or can strengthen the current thinking of government. It should be considered as more than the means of doing management better. It has the capacity to revise assumptions and to challenge injustice. This capacity is significantly hindered when projects become increasingly professional. Especially if we are to endorse a transformative stance on sustainability, citizen science and other forms of community participation should not be about creating human sensors or data drones. Rather, we argue that citizen science should serve the purpose of supporting the creation of cognitive and emotional preconditions that are necessary to instigate real, transformative change. Under a professionalized model, these aspirations are impossible to achieve. The potential of civic action for sustainability is drastically reduced. To conclude, we feel that citizen involvement in knowledge production is key, especially in the realm of sustainability. However, to be successful, we must be aware of the dangers and potential pitfalls of relying upon government support to develop greater participation. As we've revealed, a more professionalized model of citizen science is a movement towards the removal of the core ambitions of amateur engagement with science and of activism more broadly. We lean upon the thinking of Paulo Freire when considering how activism and co-production can best instigate change in the world. Knowledge only emerges through invention and reinvention. Citizen science should not be prevented from providing the necessary conditions for this to be achieved. Thank you for listening and for the opportunity to share our work in this session. I look forward to answering any questions or discussing our research in more detail.